In preparation for Jan Błachowicz versus Glover Teixeira, we're going to skirt on back to one of the year's most technical, thoughtful fights, Błachowicz's impressive decision victory over Israel Adesanya. This is the breakdown. First and foremost, yes, the commentators, particularly Joe Rogan, were overstating the value of Israel Adesanya's feints. Jan was biting on them, but he had the offensive threats to make sure that Israel couldn't always capitalise on that fact. Here, for example, Izzy feints a kick from southpaw, Jan reacts. Next time, Jan picks his leg up to cross-check a kick, and in doing so, is able to then flick out the lead leg teep to re-establish the distance. Jan tries to do something similar here, after biting on the feint. He throws a naked teep to maintain distance, only this time Izzy wasn't stepping in and was able to partially catch the kick. It's a game of anticipation. Izzy did land shots throughout based on his feints. Here, after the switch to orthodox, Israel feints the jab and the low kick. Jan's subsequent entry feels predictable and telegraphed, and Israel is able to catch him with the jab cross. Here, the question mark kick is used to effectively disguise a stance switch, right before Izzy catches Jan with a solid jab overhand. Whilst yes, he did throw the kick, it served as a sort of quasi-feint. It allowed him to switch stance and land his succeeding combination, which is often the purpose of a feint. Alternatively, sometimes the feints failed him. Here, Israel hip feints and gets a reaction. The next time he does so, Jan stands his ground and closes the distance before angling off the cage. Israel's initial feint gave him a superior position in the cage, the second feint gave it up. You can overdo it sometimes. In my opinion, Israel Adesanya's worst strike is his naked straight left from southpaw. He throws it out there, falls forward into his opponent, and often eats shots for doing so. Jan was aware of this, and so when Israel was coming forward with the straight left, Jan was throwing his counter left hook. Here, Israel hand fights to try and clear a path for his straight left, but Jan pulls back, avoiding the shot, and lands the counter left hook. Shortly after, Izzy feints the left and gets the same response, and elects to go back to orthodox instead. What about here? After the rear leg push kick, Izzy goes back to the straight left, and he eats a counter left hook for his trouble. Great timing by Jan. Now this time, when Israel looks for the straight left, Jan slips to the inside and secures a body lock. Now, Israel doesn't know whether that straight left is going to be countered by a left hook or a takedown attempt. Here, you see Jan falls short with the counter hook, as it's a jab he's trying to counter instead of the straight left. And here, this time, Izzy feints the straight left and Jan tries to counter the perceived strike. Instead, Izzy attains the double collar tie and uses it to redirect Jan away into open space. It wasn't all one-way traffic. Israel's head movement is exceptional, so aiming up top can often lead to tiring oneself out, and Jan was aware of this. Here, he misses with the jab to the head, but the jab to the body lands. These jabs to the body were crucial in commanding distance and reminding Israel that he can be touched. His jab to the head did, at times, have some success though. Here, Jan lands the jab during an offbeat, and then again as a counter when Israel tries to jab. But he couldn't get overzealous with it, given Israel's reach advantage. Here, Izzy slips to the inside for the first jab, and then lands with the overhand over the top of the next one. A few seconds later, he slips to the outside to land his counter left hook. Jan might be confident in his jab, but he shouldn't be careless with it. Defensively, Israel's head movement was on point for the most part. Here, he nails that little slip to the outside that he's always showing before avoiding the follow-up jabs. Here, it's a similar sequence. With a level stance, Israel avoids this double jab into a high kick before returning to the centre of the cage. Another basic tool that was surprisingly effective, Jan's naked straight right. Here, Izzy tries to hand fight from southpaw. Jan doesn't bother with the lead hand fighting and instead just pops Izzy's head back with the straight right. In the open stance matchup, Jan had repeated success with this approach, particularly in the back end of the fight. It's worth noting Jan's step-up body kick too. This is the kick that he bludgeoned Dominic Reyes' body with to win the belt. Jan throws the right, uses the lead hand to measure distance, and steps into the body kick to the closed side. Israel seemed prepared for this technique coming into the fight, but Jan is just so damn good at getting under the elbow and cracking the ribs. If we're talking about basics though, we have to applaud Adesanya's low kicks. As always, they were sublime. Whilst Jan had counters for Izzy's hands, the kicks were better hidden. Here, consecutive hip feints allow Izzy to slip through with a solid outside low kick. Jan checked a few, no doubt about it, like this inside low kick Izzy threw from southpaw, but Izzy had variety on his side. Both outside and inside low kicks were landing pretty regularly, as well as that oblique kick that we saw him utilise quite a bit versus Paulo Costa. Now, I personally had Jan winning the fight 29-28 coming into the final 2 rounds, but it's those last 2 rounds that allowed Jan to run away with the victory. His time in top control was emphatic. Here, after securing a double leg, Jan quickly moves from full guard into half guard by pushing Izzy's left knee down. To keep Izzy on the ground, Jan cycles between landing ground and pound and keeping Izzy pinned with a crossface. Izzy effectively refused to dig underhooks when on the bottom. Here, Izzy is able to create enough space to get his hips back and throw his arm over the top of Jan's neck. It looks like his plan is to post with one arm, push Jan's head down with the other, pull his hips out from underneath Jan, and then escape in the ensuing scramble. Jan doesn't really give him that opportunity from half guard. Instead, for round 4, Jan only abandons consolidation of his half guard when he finds opportunity to move into side control. He returns to half guard a short while later. In round 5, the story is mostly the same. They start in full guard, but Jan is able to pass whilst Izzy has his guard open in an attempt to sit up. Again, Izzy doesn't really try to dig an underhook on that near side, and instead elects to hold the overhook on Jan's head. Given this was his go-to, his priority seemed to be to minimise damage. He did, for significant periods. It just meant that his escape never came. All this is not to say that Izzy can't grapple or something bogus like that. I mean, he clearly defended a bodylock takedown in the 3rd, using his patented double collar ties to reverse position and break from the clinch. It's just that in the 4th and 5th, Jan timed exceptionally solid takedowns and was strong enough from half guard and side control to prevent Izzy from creating the space that he might have been able to against a middleweight or another, less technical light heavyweight. Jan Błachowicz looks to defend his light heavyweight championship next weekend at UFC 267 against Glover Teixeira in what promises to be an absolute barn burner. Tune in, because if the fight against Adesanya was any indication, Jan appears to be levelling up each time we see him. This next version might be the best yet.